Today we come to the end of a series of sermons on forgiveness. Much of the material for this has come from the book by Bishop Desmond Tutu, The Forgiving Book. It outlines and explains what he calls the fourfold path to healing and forgiveness. These are the 4 steps in the process as he describes it. Tell the story, name the hurt, grant forgiveness, and restore the relationship. Throughout his book, he tells stories that come from a variety of situations, stories in which this fourfold path has been used to bring healing. Some of those stories come from the horrific crimes against humanity during the years of apartheid in South Africa. Others come from everyday life. One story that serves as a thread throughout the book is the brutal murder that took place in his daughter's apartment. Tutu reminds us that the stories are not told to suggest that it takes a great person to practice these steps. Rather, he tells them to illustrate that there is nothing that cannot be forgiven, and there are no people who are undeserving of forgiveness. Sometimes, though, it takes us taking a step back and seeing it from a different perspective. Too often, we forget that the offender is a human being just like we are. We prefer to demonize them, taking away their humanity. We call them monsters, for example, instead of people who have done monstrosities. We call them murderers instead of people who have committed murder. And there is a difference. And that difference cannot be seen until we acknowledge our own sin, our own failures, our own poor choices that have caused harm to others. Like the one who has caused us harm, the one whose forgiveness is completely in our hands, we also have caused harm. And in order to truly forgive that person, we must find a way to recognize our common humanity. In the first week of this series, I referred to a family whose 2 daughters, were killed by a drunk driver. This is how Dan, the father, tells the story. We were heading down to the Live Oak area, which is where they lived. A woman who was drunk and had cocaine and methamphetamine in her system had just picked up her 2 children from a babysitter and was driving her Suburban on Windsor Street toward Cayuga at almost 50 miles per hour. She ran the stop sign and crashed into us on the left side of our minivan. The impact sent us into a power pole and then into a neighbor's yard. Neither Lynn nor I have any memories of the accident and very few memories of the day. We woke up in Dominican Hospital, Lynn on Sunday morning and me on Monday morning. Lynn had 3 fractured ribs and a broken pelvis in 2 places that prevented her from putting any weight on one leg for about 6 weeks. I had no fractures, but suffered torn cartilage in my chest, a sprained coccyx, a neck injury, and embedded safety glass in my face and elbow that had to be removed later. Both of us had concussions. My pastor has said that he told me right away when I seemed coherent. I don't remember. The first time I remember grasping it was when someone visiting me in my hospital room had said that they were sorry for my loss. I had asked, what loss? They told me I had lost my girls. I remember sharing the news with others who came to visit as if it were a baseball score. It's amazing what shock can do to your emotions. After getting out of the hospital, Dan and Linda began telling the story and naming the hurt. But they also chose to offer forgiveness to Lisa, the woman who was driving the other car. They actually began to write letters to her while she was in prison, telling her that she was forgiven. But Lisa found that she couldn't accept the forgiveness offered by them until she learned to forgive herself. And that was hard to do. In fact, it took her 5 full years before she could even look at herself in a mirror. And I said earlier, I really don't like reading from the book, but I want to tell these in her words. This is how she describes that process. She says, if I could stop time, I would go back to that night and not drink and drive. But I can't. I have to live with the guilt and the shame. Every day, in so many ways, I have to own what I've done. And I have to find a way to move through the painful feelings that still come up. Or else I couldn't be a mother to my own children. And I feel guilty saying that. Because of me, Lynn and Dan can't be parents to their children. So how do I have the right to talk about my own struggles in parenting? She says that while in jail, I read spiritual books and 12-step workbooks. And in one workbook on healing and forgiving myself, it said to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you. Every morning during my daily routine, I would stand in front of the small sink in my cell that I shared with 5 other women and say, I love you, Lisa. A cellmate of mine had been watching me do this every day, week after week, year after year. And one day she started clapping and said, you finally mean it. I didn't even realize that for 5 years, I hadn't been able to look myself in the eye as I said the words until that morning. Once that happened, she was able to follow the fourfold path of telling the story, naming the hurt, on the way to granting herself forgiveness. Amazingly, the 3 of them now work as a team. Dan and Lynn help raise Lisa's children. They also stand together and tell their story to groups of young people. Talk about restored relationships. Another young woman tells about a tragic accident that took place the first time she had driven after receiving her driver's license. She hit and killed a 70-year-old woman who was crossing the street. She crested the hill, going a little faster than she should have been. But in taking her statement, the police officer prompted her to say she was not speeding so as to avoid severe and life-lasting punishment. After all, he said, even if she had been driving slower, she still would have hit the woman. But for the next 30 years, this young woman felt guilty for not taking responsibility for what she had done. The story and the silence associated with it haunted her, adversely affecting the relationship she had with her family. It wasn't until she was able to tell the story out loud that she was able to begin this process of forgiving herself. And when that happened, she was able to restore the broken relationships in her family. Now, those stories lead us to the role of the one who has done the wrong, the one who has caused the pain. What if you are the one who is seeking forgiveness? What if you are the one who has caused the pain? What can you do? Bishop Tutu suggests there is a similar fourfold path, and these are the 4 steps on that pathway. Admit the wrong, witness the anguish, and apologize. Ask for forgiveness, and restore the relationship. Now, the hard part of this process is remembering that you can't force or demand that someone forgive you. That is their choice. If the choice is dependent upon the actions of you as the offender, then it's not made freely and it's not truly forgiveness. In other words, it doesn't matter that my mother always made me say I'm sorry to my brothers or accept their apology when they hurt me. It doesn't matter for 2 reasons. One is that making us say we're sorry is not the same as admitting the wrong. And 2, accepting an apology is not the same as granting forgiveness. In fact, as I've said several times in this series of sermons, forgiveness is not dependent upon the apology. It's better thought of as an attitude that humbly allows others to make mistakes because we know we have made our own mistakes. It goes back to Ubuntu, the African concept of our common humanity. It goes back to the scriptural recognition that we are part of the body of Christ. Or as Paul suggests in our text for today, it means we humbly accept the mercy of God by sharing that kind of mercy with others. Sometimes we've done wrong and we are unaware of what we have done. If the relationship is to be restored, however, the one who has been hurt must tell the story and name the hurt in our presence. It's only at that point that we can become partners in restoring the relationship. We do that by admitting the wrong, not by defending our actions. For the relationship to be fully restored, we must witness their anguish. We must stand in the presence of the one who has been hurt and see the impact of their pain. If we are the one who has caused the harm, and all of us have at some point or another, or we're not human. If we are the one who has caused the harm, we need to know the pain before we can offer an apology. Once the apology is made and forgiveness is requested, the story is really in the hands of the one who has been hurt. That person may not be ready to forgive. That person may not be willing to forgive. Your willingness to apologize does not usurp their right to make their own choice. All you can do while you wait is to find a way to look at yourself in the mirror, to tell the story, to name the hurt that you have caused, and then to forgive yourself. The good news is that God has already offered the gift of forgiveness. In fact, early in our service, we included a prayer of confession. It's where we admitted our wrongdoing. We remember the anguish of Jesus on the cross, and we apologize, asking forgiveness. And by grace alone, God has offered this gift of forgiveness. As a forgiven people, then, we learn to forgive others.